When I think about terms for my research, I really think about students moving among communities of practice, among in between. I sometimes use the word transfer if that's a concept that audiences that I'm talking with have heard or they use. I'm not particularly married to one term or another. I tend to think about getting to the meat and potatoes of my research, to use a term that you used before, which really has to do with the importance of identifying and recognizing these boundaries around communities of practice, or even for some audiences, identifying that communities of practice exist and that all learning and functioning and operating happens within these communities of practice. So if people want to talk about that as transfer, I'm happy to talk about it as transfer. If they want to talk about that as transformation, I'm happy to talk about it as transformation. Whatever works for them.
I actually, unlike a lot of people, think we should keep the term transfer. And it's not because I think it's necessarily an accurate term. It's because if we want to engage in conversations with people outside of the discipline and we change the term, we are no longer part of those conversations. And so I think that inside articles or attaching other terms to transfer, like expansive learning, preparation for future learning, there's many different terms, boundary crossing, you could go on and on. I think that we should definitely keep our minds open and as a field develop a set of terms, because I think what's happening is that transfer itself is very limited. It's like take knowledge one place, take it to the other. But the act of doing that is so diverse. Are you adapting it? Are you not? How do dispositions get in the way or facilitate it? So it's a very complex act that we're trying to boil down to a very simple term. And that, of course, is going to fail. But I think for the purposes of engaging in research and scholarship that leaves our field and that has conversations with other people that are in math and science and educational research, we have to keep using the term, and failing to do so kind of takes us out of that conversation.
I am much fonder now of the language of integration, which is one of the theories that Rebecca Nowacek has offered to us, I think. I've always really liked the language of agency. I much have preferred that over power. I've never really liked the model that's been implicit in power and empowering students. So I've always really been fond of the notion of agency.
We had an interesting discussion about transfer and transformative, and the notion of maybe what we're doing is trying to talk about transformative knowledge or tools that allow students to transform prior knowledge, or what allows students to transform their learning experiences. And so transformance almost became as much as transference a key word for us. I'm not quite sure that we want to give up transfer yet, because particularly in the ed psychology literature, transfer is such a key word that's already established.
I think the term transfer is both useful and exceedingly complicated. For me, it's most useful when I think of it as a really big tent. There are lots of things that we mean when we talk about transfer, and I think of it generally as a process of making connections. But I think if we want to have the conversations that we really want to have, we need additional vocabularies to fill out all of the areas that fall under that big tent. So for me, the thing that I've been really interested in thinking about is the language that I'm grappling with right now is bricolage, an idea of sort of piecing together how individuals, when they're facing new contexts, I think a lot about how people draw on genre knowledge and how they use that genre knowledge and conversations about the kinds of knowledge they have to figure out what are the ways in which this is applicable, what are the ways in which this works in the new situation, and what are the limits of this genre knowledge? What are the ways in which maybe if I use some strategies from here and some strategies from here and some from here, I might be able to come up with a way of addressing this new situation appropriately. I think the language of transfer invites us to think about application. It just comes from here to there, but it's actually an infinitely more complicated process. And so it's useful as a big tent, but we need a lot more work on sort of figuring out what goes on in the various corners of that big tent.